And that means you're not climbing that ladder anymore, you're climbing a wall. And why we like the climbing wall is that when you're climbing, you're trying to go up. Everyone's trying to go up, just like the ladder, but there's no one way to go up. And when you're climbing, sometimes you go down to go up. Sometimes you go sideways to go up. Sometimes you pause and rethink your entire strategy.
That's Anish Raman. He's the Chief Economic Opportunity Officer at LinkedIn, which is a title his CEO literally made up for him. And he just co-wrote a book called Open to Work with Ryan Roslansky, who's the former CEO of LinkedIn, that I think finally gives language to what so many people are living through right now. The idea of the climbing wall, that careers aren't ladders anymore. There's no single path that you go up. You now go sideways. You go down to go up. You pause and you sometimes completely rethink your entire career strategy. But I keep coming back to one question, and you've probably heard some version of this by now. In the age of AI, don't just apply for jobs, create your own role. I mean, it's pretty much everywhere. LinkedIn posts, keynote stages, book titles, and honestly, I believe it. I've lived it. I think it's true. But what does that actually look like? Not the polished version, not the I followed my passion and everything worked out version. What does it look like on a random Tuesday afternoon when you're staring at your calendar and wondering, did you make the right call? Anish describes his own career and job title. It makes no sense, he says. War correspondent, presidential speechwriter, startup marketing, Facebook, California governor's office. And he says the moment it all clicked was when he stopped thinking about his titles and started looking at his skills. He wrote them all down and the thread appeared. Every single role had been about, he says, explanatory storytelling and building coalitions. That was his math, his secret sauce, as he calls it. And then he says something that I think is the entire point. Nobody beats you at being you. And I think that most people hear that and go, okay, but great, how do I do that? So today, I want to introduce you to someone who is living proof of what this looks like in practice. Not because he had some grand plan, actually quite the opposite. He didn't have a plan at all. I want you to meet Jacob Kantor. He's a nationally recognized K-12 EdTech advisor, connector, and the founder of JK K12, where he helps education companies earn trust, success, and traction with district and state education leaders. He goes by a title that I promise you have never heard before: Chief DODO, District Office Door Opener. And that is a title, as he's going to tell us, he made up. Well, technically, one of his friends helped make it up for him as a joke, and Jacob ran with it, and it's been great ever since. And that right there tells you everything about how this works and what this episode is all about. Jacob has 18 plus years of experience across K-12 education, publishing, test prep, and edtech sales and partnerships. He's worked with organizations ranging from early stage startups to national nonprofits and foundations. He specializes in helping companies navigate complex district buying cycles, helps people align with superintendent priorities, and move from pilot to scale, all while staying grounded in equity, efficacy, and human impact. He serves on the boards of the ASU GSV AI Summit and National AI Literacy Day, contributing to the national conversations around responsible AI adoption and the future of learning and work. He was the top performer everywhere he went, and then one day, 3 mentors told him the same thing: stop looking for another ladder to climb. You're ready for the wall. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Jacob.
So I spent probably 15 or 16 years being like the number one guy across 6 or 8 different companies, right? And a lot of people, I'm cognizant, say that they were like the number one guy in all interviews, and you go talk to their former bosses and they were like, oh, that person got fired. Not the case. You could talk to any of my bosses. I was the number one guy. I'll give you references, no problem. But I say all that because I was used to really hustling, right? I'm an immigrant kid. I'm from Ukraine originally. I'm building a life for me and my family here, even before I was married and had kids. Like, I had a sales goal. I worked for a company. I got paid every 2 weeks, and here's my goal and here's how I'm going to get it. So I never needed kind of the motivation outside of, it's the immigrant hustle. So as some projects of mine ended right during COVID for an international company, I kind of, called 3 mentors. One was one of the original guys at Princeton Review. One was a former boss and CEO of a company. And one was like a very big name in the edtech space. And I just said, hey, this project is ending. What companies are really doing good work? Who do I need to talk to? And all 3 of them kind of said the same thing to me: don't go work for anyone. you would be rushing into like a brand new relationship. Think about this as dating. Like you just broke up with a girl and you're gonna go date like and get a girlfriend the first girl you meet. And I was like, it's a weird analogy, but okay, like I get it. And they all kind of said the same thing, like, why don't you just go be a consultant and do this yourself, figure out who you've sold to in the past, figure out your contacts, and then go offer that up. And I was like, I don't know what any of this means. You guys are talking a different language. But inevitably, 3 days into this like month-long vacation that I planned for myself, and I mean vacation like more workouts and not being on Zoom calls. 3 days in, one of them called and said, "Hey, I gave your number to somebody. You should pick up the phone and you should take this really serious." And that company was the largest provider of charter school, basically schooling across the country. So I was on a project there for about 18 months. And then quickly I was on with the first company doing real AI literacy work when ChatGPT launched. And then I was on a project with, Masterclass and their K-12 product and with some special ed folks. So quickly I found myself, oh, I don't know who I'm going to work with. I don't know who the first one's going to be, to, oh, I have 5 or 6 companies and they're all kind of in different verticals. And I'm going on this adventure with them monthly to figure out where their solutions fit and who should we go talk to and who are the folks that are smarter than myself, to really give us guidance into where this lives in the ecosystem. So I can't say that I really had like this vision for any of it. I just kind of said like, hey, I'm going to take a month off and like refresh my brain. And then 3 really pivotal mentors that have kind of shaped a lot of the opportunities I've had over and over again. This was really more their idea than mine. And that's something to be said, right? Like I grew up playing sports. I played football, I played basketball growing up, and now I have a 7-year-old who's working his way towards black belt, and he's got a long way to go. He's a blue belt right now. But like this idea of like his coaches see what's in him before he sees it himself, right? And this idea of like, I mean, I'm a nerd for all the books I read and Think and Grow Rich and Alchemist and all this stuff, right? Sometimes we have no idea what the path is, but others who know us, even sometimes not as in depth as some of our best friends, have seen something that we've done and been like, all right, you're capable of so much more than you know. And I think sometimes it takes that from others gently pushing you off of the ledge before you're even ready for it. So, thankfully I had some great mentors that saw that in me. And, that gets me back to like, I love football. I love the NFL. I played, football for 3 years, was, a recruited athlete coming out of high school. And I'll tell you, my first ever tryout for football, the coach was like a former NFL guy, and he had us do like burpees and bear crawls for like 90 straight minutes. And that day I came in, I was like, I don't know what this is. I'm sticking to basketball. That sucked. And, I was a big kid and like he needed a lineman, but he was like, hey, you're clearly frustrated. Go take the day off, go take a bath. I'll see you. This was like a Monday. He's like, I will see you on Wednesday. I'm giving you an excused absence on Tuesday, but on Wednesday, if you don't come back to practice, like the call is going to be to your mom and it's going to be, why is your kid so soft? And I was like, oh, well, all right, I'm going to go take the day off. But what did I do that day? I just kind of sat there and I was like, everybody's doing this except for me. And I somehow got a pass. And like, that's kind of not how I roll in sports anyway. But that Wednesday I came back and I played football and I love football. But like clearly that coach saw something in me, and similar to, full circle to these mentors that I have now, where they said, hey, you could go do so much other stuff. Like, why are you thinking about a full-time job right away? So thank all the praise out to them. They know who they are. I'll make sure they listen to this as well.
Now, that part of Jacob's story flips the narrative we usually hear. We talk about creating your own role like it's the solo act of courage. Like you just wake up one morning and the future clearly, is there. You're ready to take that leap. But Jacob didn't see it. his mentors did, as often happens. In Open to Work, Anish Raman talks about how careers used to be ladders. You got on, you climbed, you knew what the next rung looked like, it was clear. And it was also exclusionary. If you didn't start in the right place with the right degree, you couldn't really even find the ladder that it was that you needed to climb. The climbing wall, however, is different. There's no single path up. You might go sideways, you can go down to go up, you can pause and then completely rethink your entire strategy. But here's the part people don't talk about enough. On a climbing wall, you can't always see the next handhold from where the ground is calling out. Reach left, there's a hold you can't see from up there. That's what Jacob's mentors did. They saw his next move before he did. And truthfully, that is what great educators do, which is why I believe educators are irreplaceable in the age of AI. So here's my question for you. Who is that person for you? And if you can't think of anyone, who could you be that person for? But perhaps more important than anything else, how are we building those relationships for the young people in our schools? Now, one of the questions that I get asked all the time, and I know Jacob does too, what does the behind the scenes of this actually look like to get to where you want to go? Because from the outside, when somebody has built their own thing, it looks like they just show up and everything's perfect, or one day they just decided they were going to do this and off they went. They launched something and it just all came together. We all know it doesn't work that way. So I asked Jacob to start by walking me through a day in the life.
Yeah, and I'll kind of even look at the calendar for today and give you like a day in the life. So this morning I launched a new client, so I went outbound to about 100 different districts within network to say, hey, I think this is something super interesting. You might not agree, and that's okay, but like I think this might be worth your time to at least peek at and say, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, or this is kind of interesting. Then I spent some time on kind of a government relations call, learning about the state of funding. Then I had some calls with a partner of mine and some independent schools that they're trying to target, conversations. Now we're recording, and then I have about 3 or 4 other conversations, but I'll even give you a better example. So last week, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, I had a pretty light day. And by light day, I mean like I only had like 6 or 7 calls, but one of them was with the Wyoming Department of Education, the person who covers AI there. The next one was with the Utah Department of Ed, with the person who covers AI there. The next one was with the Oregon Department of Ed talking about rural schools. The next one was with a friend from Los Angeles County Office of Ed. The next call was with San Bernardino County Office of Ed. And then the last one was like with a large district in the Bay Area. And I kind of got off that day and I was like, today did not seem like that busy of a day. But I looked back and I was like, wow, if you just look at the system leaders that spent time with me just today, like people, would have paid to be a fly on the wall, even though we weren't talking about anything really secretive, right? We were just kind of talking about strategy, what they're thinking about, what they're most excited about, what is truly like a thorn in their side. So that way I can kind of identify where this lives within the edtech ecosystem and then go try to solve something for them, right? So typical day, even though that's the luxurious side, that's like the Gucci day of like meetings. Normally it's just with, with some of the organizations that I support and system leaders and facilitating kind of thoughtful conversations. But to your point around like the DODO persona, so shout out to Ian McCullough, my marketing CMO wizard friend, who I basically said like, hey, can you spend an hour with me? I'd like for you to listen to like what I do in my pitch, because I'm meeting with 50 companies a week. And some of them are moving forward in the pipeline for me, and some of them are just never getting back to me. So I'd like you to dissect where this is falling out. And he said, no worries, like send me some coffee. So we were on an hour call and I was like, hey, this is what I do. This is what I show him. And he was like, you are doing way too much. You're like giving them everything where they don't really even need you. And I'm like, that's okay with me. I'm like forever giving everything. Like, if you could do this yourself, like I'm rooting for you. We're trying to make an impact on kids' lives. Like that's okay in my book. If they take a document I built and they make it their own, I'm okay with that. I 100% support that. But he made an offhand joke where he was like, I'm gonna make fun of you for a second. He's like, you're kind of like the dodo. You're like the district office store opener. And I was like, I think I could run with that. Like as weird as that sounds, like when have you ever heard that term? A, is there an emoji in my phone for that? B, can I like update my LinkedIn? Because previously, when somebody would ask me like, what do you do? I would always use kind of the real estate reference and say like, oh, I'm kind of like a realtor, you hire me and I will walk you into like a district and we'd have a thoughtful conversations. And sometimes you solve for something they're working on and sometimes you don't. And as you know, if you've never bought real estate, you've never used a realtor to like have a rental, people were like, I don't know what you're talking about, guy. It's real estate, education. So it would just go over somebody's head, right? And on my end, what I realized as well is real estate's second nature to me. I have my license in California, and I was really lucky in 2010 to buy a property. And then I had a different mentor that really pushed me every time he saw a decent deal. He was like, hey, I don't know how you're doing on finances, but like, this is a killer deal. You should actually think about buying this. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I work for McGraw Hill and I make $36,000 a year. But at that time, I rented all the rooms at my house through friends. And I was totally like, house hacking. I was not married yet. My girlfriend didn't live with me at the time. So I was like, you guys could rent every room here and I don't want to have to pay mortgage. Like, no problem. So like I slowly but surely saved some money and bought a rental. And again, for everyone listening who's like, oh, it must be nice. Like we're talking about recession time in 2010 and 2012 when properties were 225 grand and my first property was 284 grand when now it's $1 million property, right? So I got really, really lucky during that time to just have kind of the courage, I guess. Like, because I'll tell you, when I told my folks that I wanted to buy a house, they were like, why? They lived through the Northridge earthquake where all the homes around them like fell, right? And insurance didn't cover anything and they had to do FEMA. So they were not with it. And immigrants, right? They were like, why are you going to buy a house? And I was like, because I read a lot of like finance and real estate books and like, I do not want to rent when I have a family and I do not want to keep renting and keep giving money away. And P.S., there's nothing wrong with renting. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, how dare you talk about renters? Like, no, I'm rooting for you. But prices of homes are significantly more expensive in Los Angeles than in 2010, right? So that is really a big catalyst in my life where because I bought those properties, when I decided to kind of step out and do my own thing and not collect a paycheck every 2 weeks, I had those rental properties offsetting my living expenses, right? Like my mortgages were covered. I didn't need a crazy amount for insurance. I didn't need a crazy amount for gas. I didn't need a crazy amount for food. Like those baselines were covered. So it let me kind of breathe a little. And I'm cognizant that I was in a lucky position where most that are thinking about, hey, what do I do if tomorrow the district lets me go, or if the company I'm working with downsizes, like most are not going to be in that position, but I was really, really lucky. So I kind of encourage all of your listeners, right? Like we do live in a time where 90% of the world lives, the world is probably a bad stat, of the US lives paycheck to paycheck. If you can set up some level of a nest egg where if things do fall apart on you and you have 3 months to figure it out, like I'm confident in everyone's ability when your back's against the wall to actually figure it out, right? But that is hard to do when all of your money is going out towards bills and everything. So I'm cognizant that like my fortunes and buying properties way back when are not in the cards for everybody yet.
Anish Raman says, put your job title aside and list the skills you actually use and go find the thread. Find your math. Jacob's math, relationships, and trust that open district doors. That's what he'd been doing across 15 years and 8 companies. He just didn't have a name for it until Ian made a joke on a phone call. And I love the name. Chief Dodo is so funny because it's like absurd but memorable all in one go, but it instantly tells you what he does in a way that K12 EdTech Consultant never could. It's the description of a capability only he fills in exactly his way. That's what create your own role actually means. You look at what you've already been doing across every role and you find that thread, and then You give it a name. Okay, so here's where I want to get real for a second, because we can talk about climbing walls and finding your math and creating your thread and your own role all day long. And all of that is true. But there's a piece of this conversation that I think gets skipped almost every single time, and it's the financial piece. Nobody teaches you this, not in school, not in most homes, and especially not in education, where we are trained to think about impact and purpose, but almost never about building financial security for ourselves, which ironically is one of the most important pieces sometimes to being able to make impact and purpose on your own terms. So when someone says, go create your own role, underneath that is a fear, and rightfully so, about how am I going to financially be in a position where I can actually take that risk. Now, Jacob was really honest about this. He made some financial moves early in his career from a lot of books, right? Not from school, but it could be from school, that gave him the breathing room so that when he went out on his own, he didn't have that stress. And I asked him about it because I think it really matters. If we're going to talk about agency and creating your own path, we have to talk about what makes that financially possible for everyone.
Yeah, I'll even give you kind of a story that happened in the last 7 days. So I was on a catch-up call with a superintendent I just met early March. So as we're recording this, it's early May. So within, 45 days, I just met this leader and we connected through mutual friends, and she booked on my calendar, and it was just a catch up to like figure out what she does at the district, not what she does, but what she's seeing. And one of kind of the interesting ways this conversation went is, while we were catching up about family and my weird shoes in my background and all the stuff, she said, "Hey, so can I hire you as a consultant for the district? And could you weed through all my emails and get me the tools I need?" And like my gut was like, it's not what I do. I'm the DODO. I normally bring stuff to you. I don't know what I mean, but I kind of like pulled myself back and I was like, well, tell me more. Like, what tools are you thinking about? What do you need? And we had a pretty awesome conversation about, her assistant soup wanting to add this, and the CBO wanting to do this, and the principal's asking for this, and the teachers are asking for this. And I was like, this is super fascinating. And would that be a new business line item for me, right? Like working with districts to identify what they're looking for and then kind of weeding through solution providers, and figuring out like where are those two that I can present and say like, hey, I've looked at 10 now. Here's the two that I found that actually might solve a need, but also like now it's in your guys' hands to like qualify based on your specific needs. So that was interesting. But going to your question on ESSER, so during ESSER time, I left college-wise because one of the mentors that we talked about called and said, "Hey, you should do some research this weekend on all things ESSER. There's a ton of money, coming into the space." And for 10 years, I sold test prep and tutoring. So having that kind of in my background for a long time, he said, "Hey, like there's designated dollars for tutoring. I don't know anybody who knows the space of tutoring better than you do. So you should think about this." So I did some research and I was like, "Yeah, I think you're right. Like this is like how is inbound?" And his response was like, "I'm on calls all day long with districts that potentially might need what we have." And I was like, "Okay." So I was Varsity Tutors' first hire when they were going into school districts. I think I sold their first $5 million in deals. And why I give you kind of that context is when I was working there, and there was only two of us on the phones. It was me, a different sales rep, and John, who got me hired there. And when I left there a year in, there was 15 sales reps there, right? So we really like proved the model that like people were not just buying tutoring, but like had a specific need, and there was obviously a bucket of dollars that was paying for it. So at that time, we saw a lot of competitors coming into the space where every publishing company now did tutoring, every charter operator did tutoring now. So it was like every mom and pop had now tutoring online. So it was interesting because it went from, oh yeah, there's like 10 companies total that should be servicing this entire network, to, oh, there's 150 companies and all of them are spamming districts with the shiny tools that they have. And look, there was a lot of junk, and there was junk that was purchased. And I at first, reflecting back on ESSER, I kind of said, "Hey, like district leaders, what are you guys thinking about? Like you guys are buying some tools that like I would totally tell, forget my tool, don't buy that tool. But you realize that everybody was in an immense amount of pressure at that time, and they just inherited, and I don't know what better word, a pile of money came from the sky that they've never seen ever before. And some districts got, LAUSD got $2 billion, right? Some of these districts got like $50 million. When you just have $50 million show up and somebody is in your inbox, like, I can help for that, you kind of say, like, let's test it. Let's see. Like, I'll test it with you and you and you, whoever is going to be the best one is going to earn the business. And, what's fascinating is there was a lot of testing at that time. I think the one thing we didn't see, and I'd love your take on this as well, is I didn't see a lot of conversations going on after testing about what tools didn't work. And that was the real miss, because I don't mind a district leader saying, I think this is going to move the needle for my kids. I've been on with them. I see who they're working with. Let's try it. I don't mind that at all. We're all doing the best we can. I'm a big believer in everyone's doing the best they can at all times. But if after you see that that tool or that solution that you bought didn't work, and you don't share the fact that it didn't work with others, those tools are now going to others in the network and saying, hey, we're working with XYZ district, your neighboring district. They're not saying, oh, it's not working for them. They're just saying we work with them, right? And unless somebody's truly doing some due diligence calls, like, they might also then buy that junk solution. So that is the challenging side of it, right? And I was just at South by Southwest where we spoke together, and I was in the Instructure and EdSafe Alliance, and thank you, Aaron, for the invite, right? Like, we were talking about, data, efficacy, case studies, referral districts, like, all of these things are really basic now for every single provider that I work with. Those are the bare minimums, right? Like, hey, what you say that you solve for math gains, you say you solve for ELA or getting kids up to speed on reading, like, show me. Like, beyond your marketing department that's putting out fancy flyers, like, show me, like, where is the peer-reviewed evidence that you are studying with a college where they're putting their name on that we study this and this is our opinion and not the company's opinion. Because I'll tell you, I see case studies all the time from companies that come across my desk, and I'm seeing 10 to 50 a week, right? Like, I see a lot of inbound, and most of the time the case studies are their own, hey, this is what we're seeing. And while I'm not saying I don't believe them, I like hope that that data is accurate. It's not enough now to just show that, right? You got Instructure, you got some of these like companies that literally offer evidence as a service now, right? Like, they will find a district and they will find a research partner and they will study it. Does it cost money? It does, right? So I'm cognizant that, like, a startup that is bootstrap might not necessarily be the customer for Learn Platform and their efficacy as a service product. But there are ways to do that with colleges where you say, hey, like, we think we have something, we'd love to like co-test this with you.
No, absolutely. And I think that's such a hard one too, because it's like, it's like anything, right? It can work in one space for one group, but it might not work in another space for another group. So being able to have those different variables there too, I think really, really matters. I mean, I think most people know my perspective on just like random tools and random things. I think so much of it depends on what is the system that something is coming into, because if that system isn't designed to support the efficacy and the development or the integration of the tool, I think, and you don't have a bigger vision for it. And it's just like, oh yeah, we're just going to give this to everybody and we're just going to let people do, like, where I've been hearing it a lot is with iReady, because obviously I don't really, I've never taught elementary, but I am really curious to hear, like, why all of a sudden is everybody saying this? And so I asked the district partners that I'm working with now, like, 'cause everyone's pretty much using iReady, and people will say a lot of times, it's not really the product. It's like, well, a lot of people, I think, got it during COVID. So there wasn't that integration, right? The beginning of it wasn't as well introduced as it could have been. And then they're like, well, yeah, like some people do this, but some people do this over here.
So I think with so many things, I think sometimes there's too much pressure on the company themselves to do all of the work. You know, you need to create the product and you need to prove it and you need to train and you need to do everything. And I think to some degree there has to be accountability and partnership. But I think that can come from the company. If you want ultimately your product to be successful, you should be designing different learning journeys for different people. And then you can map the learning journey to the research, to these different things instead of trying to lump everything together into one space. And so for example, I think Magic School is a really good one. I can't say I'm the biggest fan, right? Like I don't think it gets us to where we're trying to go. I don't think it gives people the skills. However, if you're struggling with your CTE teachers, that's a valid use case. They don't have that content knowledge. They don't have these. I mean, I would argue then how are you going to direct the tool? But like the fact that a lot of these things are kind of done, there are use cases where, okay, yes, in this scenario, yes, this could be something that's helpful versus trying to bucket everything like as a whole. And so I think just being able to have your own criteria, like I tell people that with AI all the time, have a criteria. Does this match your goals and what it is you're trying to get to? Because if it does, then your story and your journey is going to look different. So I think it's hard. Like I think there's too much pressure on companies and like not enough accountability on the side, not enough partnership, not enough direction, and just too much pressure. Like I really agree with you that do the best you can with what you have because not only is everybody doing the best they can with what they have, but I think the problem is they're doing it in silos. I think when you start bringing those people together more, and that's the whole like design thinking, the empathy piece, when you start bringing those players together more, beyond just like your one or two focus groups, I think that's when you could really start understanding where are the gaps, where are the nuances, and what can we do better together to accelerate this forward. And I think, today to have that AI kind of technology is a game changer in that way because working with data in ways prior to that was, I think, more difficult. But speaking of relationships and building these connections, I always say, I don't think I've seen a more authentic and genuine relationship builder than you. Like, I'm always just like, you've got kids, you've got all these different responsibilities and everything, but you are somebody who, that when I explain you to somebody, I'm like, he's the kind of guy, if he ever knows you have something going on, he will never, ever, ever forget to ask you about it. And not just once, he'll ask you again and again. And then he'll ask you after it happened to see how it went and what happened. Like, this is literally how I describe you now to anyone who's like, hey, I talked to Jacob. Do you know Jacob? I'm like, yeah, let me tell you about Jacob. This is what he's like. So every Friday, I think one of the great things you do as well is you put out this beautiful recap of people you've connected with and you give these like flowers publicly and you just like I think you're just so good at appreciating people both offline and online. I would say offline more because I've seen you so much offline now. What started that and how has that been for you?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I used to journal every day. And the only reason the journaling stopped is I cannot find that journal. Like it is somewhere under a bookcase or something. And it wasn't like a, one page journal. It was like, here are three cool things that happened today. And here's one thing that like I wish was better. And then I would reflect at the end of the year and go through these notes and be like, where are the themes? And, I'm a Tim Ferriss person and I like to reflect and color code and see which things are, sucking the life out of me versus bringing me lots of joy. So I was doing this and I kind of had an aha moment where I was like, man, look at this crazy week I had. Or like what we talked about earlier, like, look at this crazy day I had. I was on with Wyoming and Utah and Oregon and LA County and San Bernardino and like a district and a small district and the rural. And on my end, I was like, nobody knows about any of this at all. And like, I wonder how many of these people could connect with other people because they're all moving cool projects along. And like in my brain, I was like, I'm the bottleneck. I was like, I have all these conversations and like I move on to the next week and like I have a new set of conversations. So I was like, I wonder if I highlight the work I'm doing and the meetings I'm having, and there would be a pass-through line where some friends would start talking to some other friends, and then lo and behold, I would be like the glue that meshed everything together. And that's exactly what happened. I just posted like, hey, what a crazy week. I had 77 phone calls and I met with these people and this is what we talked about. And it was really neat because people would naturally add others and they like partnerships would form and one state would start talking to another state or one solution provider would be like, oh, I actually have been wondering about Oregon, and that's somebody I can reach out to. I've kind of stopped as of recently. I don't know if you noticed, I'm still very active on LinkedIn, but I don't do my weekly posts anymore. And I'll tell you why. And this is kind of like the not a downside because I don't see anything as a negative, but like the potential risks of building in public as well. So on my end, I would post these weekly, and I found that like, it's really hard for somebody to jump on with me and say at the end of that call, like, man, I don't like you at all. Like, look, are they thinking that? Maybe, I guess. I don't know. I wouldn't think so, but maybe. But most of the time, everybody who jumps on with me at the end of the call, they're saying, can we book additional time? Can you send a proposal? What does this look like? Do you have availability? Can you activate on a project? It normally goes very similar to exactly kind of how I just phrased it. And I was sending proposals and this and that, and some were activating and I was starting on projects, but a lot of them weren't. And I was like, I wonder if something is going on in the background where maybe my message is being diluted, or maybe I'm not communicating clearly. And I couldn't figure it out until one day I realized that like there were other consultants that would look at my weekly like debriefs and then just add everybody on there and be like, hey, I know you're, meeting with Jacob and you're really good friends with Jacob, but like, I actually do something quite similar. And like, I have good people in the network. Like, they're not gonna unanimously say no to, inbound, but I was losing deals because I was so public on who I was meeting. So I've kind of refrained from sharing, which really kills me as like, I overshare on LinkedIn, right? Like, on Saturdays we have swim lessons, the first Saturday of the month we do Home Depot builds. Like, my life is pretty open on the one social media platform that I use is LinkedIn, and I'm pretty vocal and active about all things education, but also what I'm doing with my own life. And I found that to be kind of an aha moment where I was like, there are some things that I will probably not share until they are further down the pipeline for me of kicking off projects. And you and I talk all the time, right? Like, I am, and take this for nothing other than words, but like, I have weekly and monthly conversations with some of the biggest folks in AI, some of the biggest districts, some of the biggest people that are doing statewide deals or countrywide deals or international things. And what I realize is like, maybe those are the ones that I don't publish, that things are going well, not because I don't want them to work with others. Like, I encourage everybody, if you can solve a problem together, work together. But I realize until things are like, underway and projects have launched, it's probably better to just be quiet. And maybe I pat myself on the back for having a good meeting or a good week, but like, don't share it publicly.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and I was comparing it to what the tech space was like when it was the one-to-one scene. It's similar to today, right? Something new is happening. And I remember back then, like for me, it was a lot more around like I had iPads. So a lot of it was being part of like the Apple education community and people that were one-to-one in devices and whatnot. And I just remember it was such a like pure and such a like authentic space where you could share anything you were doing. And it just helped everybody get stronger, like better together. And now I'm with you a little bit. Like I think twice sometimes before sharing things, which is awful because I think the whole point of being in that space where we were oversharing because the oversharing led us to connect with more people and like, learn more things. But now like the way in which people will shamelessly just take and reframe anything is it's interesting. And I always say, people will lump it as like, oh, like unethical behavior and whatnot. And I actually think there's such a deeper human desire for creation and for wanting to do these things, but not knowing how and then doing it the wrong way, which doesn't make it right at all. But I do think at a time when we are talking about AI and we're talking about agency and we're talking about what does it really mean to be human, I always think one of the most beautiful things I've seen recently is watching people build with Claude or build with anything, Replit, Lovable, just building. And I always say, like, if you talk to anybody, I hear it more with Claude Code, I think, than anything else. But I think if you talk to anybody who's using Claude, one of the things they'll tell you is like, oh my God, it was up till 1 a.m. Oh my God, it was up till 2 a.m. Oh my God, I can't put this away. Oh my God, I can't stop. This is addicting. And it's not in an unhealthy screen time, I can't get off my technology kind of way. It's in a I am building because I think building is so innately human and creating, building, making. And the fact that people have that all in their hands now, I think if we don't start supporting people, especially young people, and getting it done the right way, I think we're going to see more and more of this isolation kind of happen, especially at a time when it's so easy to just take something someone's done, put it in and be like, oh, can you give me a different word for this? And be able to like spend something out in that way. Or, oh, can you write 10 emails to these people that, I just saw somebody else talk to? There's a degree of work that you would have had to have done before to be able to replicate something or do what you're saying that I think now in 5 minutes you can put into an AI tool. Oh, can you scrape this person's profile and get me XYZ? So I think, when people talk about ethics and whatnot, like it's just so gray that it's just interesting that you bring that up in that way, because we definitely don't want people taking these things and going more behind closed doors or having to feel like it's not a safe space in that way anymore. So you definitely have a fantastic LinkedIn presence, right? Which is probably why you're experiencing some of the things you do. I feel like it's something people struggle with, but they're always curious about in general. Any tips for people on the platform, what they can do, how to engage?
It's a good question. So it's funny, this is going on like 6 months ago. I had two superintendents reach out and they're like, can you spend an hour with us? And I'm like, sure. I'm normally asking you for time. So whatever you need, no problem. And we spent an hour where I literally screen shared and shared like my LinkedIn. And they're like, tell us how you like formatted this stuff. And I was like, I think you're giving me a lot of credit. I have no strategy here. I did read an article once on Forbes that was like, this is how you format your profile, have your companies on and have an introduction and a professional photo. But they were asking, they're like, what's your strategy? And I was like, I don't really have one. I like post what I'm reading. I read a lot of like Whiteboard Advisors. They share a daily email and you guys should subscribe. They'll do a roundup of like the 25 different articles and stories based on K-12 or higher ed or workforce or whatever. So like that is my daily reading. So, and if you are friends with me on LinkedIn or connections, like you will know when I'm like in reading mode because there'll just be like 10 posts in a row. Like, this is interesting. This is interesting. What I'll tell you too is I can't say that I really have like a take on any of the articles. I'm just reading. Hey, this is what this article said. Here's the link. If you're interested, like go read it yourself, right? So I can't say I like ever have my original take on any of the things I'm reading, but like, I'm just always posting. I mean, if LAUSD has an off day, like you'll see me taking my kids to the zoo and being like, thankfully I work for myself and I don't have to ask anybody for permission, right? Or if I'm at a conference, I'm trying to highlight the interesting people that I'm with. And I'll tell you that strategy came a number of years ago, and you'll get a kick out of this. I've actually only been to 4 ASU GSVs ever. And before that, I never attended ASU GSV. I never attended ISTE. I never attended FETC because I sold in test prep and tutoring to independent schools. So the conferences I was going to was like the NACAC or a summer, discovery program conference. So I never had the need to go to any of those conferences. And what's interesting this year, one of the superintendents I sat with, they were like, how do you know everybody here? And I was like, A, you're giving me a lot of credit. I know like 5% of the people here. Like it just happens to be that they walked by and said hello. But B, like I've actually only been coming to this conference for 4 years and there's 7,000 people here. So thanks for thinking I'm popular. I know like 100 total people here. But those 100 people are like super interesting people. And what I realized is, I think one of the years I was on the AI council for the AI part of ASU GSV, and I had a goal to go meet every single vendor. I was like, I need to go meet all these vendors purely because that's my audience. That's who I sell to, right? Is the vendors. And then I take them into districts. And I quickly like didn't accomplish that. I think over the course of like 6 hours, I met like 6 of them. And I was like, this is not working. And then I was like, what's a different approach? And I was walking around with like 2 super influential superintendents. And I was like, I think I have a different strategy. I'm going to take these 2 soups to the vendors and have them have thoughtful conversations. And then I'm going to be the person who brought them district leaders and snap a photo and tag them online. And in the course of 3 days, there was like 1 million impressions on those posts. And I was like, okay, this makes no sense, but I'm going to double down and continue. So now if I'm at a conference, you 100% know because I'm posting who I'm hanging out with, who I'm at a baseball game with, what happy hour I'm planning on going to or what session I'm sitting in. So really kind of just sharing. And look, some of that is an inherent built FOMO, right? LinkedIn is a FOMO machine, right? It's like, there are friends that are on Capitol Hill right now that are doing some important work. And I see that and I'm like, that is awesome. And I'm having FOMO, but also I'm not because I'm at home with my family. But like inherently, there's a mechanism of LinkedIn to share all the interesting work you're doing. And like there is some FOMO there. So I just say, for everyone who asks me for advice, it's like finding Nemo, and I have a 7 and a 5-year-old, so Disney runs my life. Just keep swimming, just keep posting. Like you have no idea what's gonna like take off on there and what's gonna be a total dud.
Isn't that true? The truth. That's always like the hardest thing. People want like a nice packaged up strategy, and there never really is one in that way. Okay, so tell me, do you think there's anything else we should talk about or anything else we should cover?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been, I feel like you and I have been discussing recently is kind of all around this idea of 3 to 5 times a week, every single week, I'll get an inbound either text, phone call, or email from a district leader saying, like, hey, do you have a couple minutes? And I'm always normally plugging them for time, right? Like, hey, do you have a couple minutes for me? I want to tell you about something. So, what's fascinating is I almost can tell exactly what they are looking to get out of those calls when they ask for time. I'm like, A, is everything okay? B, are you leaving your district? C, are you in trouble? Like, did something happen? Do you have a crazy board member or a crazy parent or whatever the situation is? So inevitably, like, I'd love to get your take on it is I feel like you and I are having such interesting conversations out there where I'd almost welcome more of those conversations with folks that are thinking about it and less of like to be I'm always an encourager, right? But not to be a discourager of people that are thinking about doing their own thing, but really kind of giving you intel on like, don't do this. The companies are not looking for this, but they are looking for this. Like if you're thinking about going to work. And then to your point, right? Like start thinking about and building these things while you already have a job in off hours. Because if you jump in without a plan, some will figure it out. And others will be like, this is not for me. I'm going back into a different district role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe we just open it as an invitation. Maybe well, I will add it to I will add it to this episode right here, right now. We'll open it up as an invitation. Maybe me and you can do something together, and we invite people in. And I, because I think again, there's so many things today where people feel like it's either or. I have to do this or I have to do this, and it's not. Like you can do a few different things and have those juggling. You can have one kind of thing that lays that foundation, and then a few other things you play with. And I think another thing that I think is cool is like when you do have those other things to play with, they almost become outlets for you. Whereas if everything is boxed into this one role, this one thing, then you feel like, oh, there's things I want to do that I can't do. There's this thing over here, there's that over here. But if you build some of those other things for yourself, that doesn't mean you have to build multiple. Even if you build another outlet for yourself, I always say so much of the reason I started the podcast, the blog, and all these different things that I do that now have turned into like something else, it was just because it was the best way for me to learn. For me to be able to come on and have conversations with people, I would learn so much. I was like, it's amazing that I'm recording this and you're getting to listen too. But even if nobody else listened, this is like one of my most valuable experiences. So I think we invite people and maybe open it up and kind of see where it goes from there, because I totally agree with you. If there was ever a time to do something, this is the moment. This is the moment. This is the time. And I think when you're online, it can feel like, oh, but everybody's already doing this. So what can I do? I always say just go to the mall. Go to the mall, go to your grocery store and look and take out your phone and take a selfie, and everyone will look at you like you're crazy. This is how not normalized sharing, documenting any of these pieces are today.
Totally, totally. And I'll tell you, if you're thinking about if I snap this selfie, how weird this will be and what people would think about me, don't you worry. My wife looks at me and rolls her eyes daily when I tell her about LinkedIn stuff. I swear. But I promise if you continue to do it, like there will be random stuff that comes in that you've never thought about, or somebody that knows somebody that needs some work but they're not in the US, but they're asking about how to come into the US or how to do this. Like there's just so many LinkedIn users now that like even for my 22,000 that I have on there, which is awesome, right? Like I focus in a lot of time and energy there, but my whole business lives on LinkedIn, right? All of my inbound comes on LinkedIn and referral. And like, do I have a website? Yes, chiefdodo.com, self-plug there. But everything lives on LinkedIn. So if you're ever thinking like, will this be weird? Will people think I'm weird? I have no issues. I got some like weird shoes behind me. I have a heart box. I have a Lego set. There's some rock shoes. Like, let your weirdness out. Like, there are others that are gonna jive with that weirdness too, and you have no idea how the weirdness will connect you to somebody else who will also have that passion for whatever you are thinking about, talking about, or doing.
Now, if this episode has you thinking about what your own climbing wall looks like, how to find your map, how to find that thread for yourself, or how to start building something on your own terms, we are going to go deeper on this in our upcoming webinar that I think we just spontaneously decided we're going to do during the episode. The link will be in the show notes, and we would love to see you there. Now, there's one part of this episode that I do want to go a little bit deeper into because I do think when people think about showing up, there is a lot of bit of fear about being seen. And I will say, I do think the landscape today is definitely very different. I remember, early in the one-to-one iPad days when I first started getting online, I was part of the Apple education community. And I feel like it was just this really pure, authentic space where you could pretty much just share anything you were doing. And it just really helped everybody collectively get stronger, that whole better together. And now, honestly, like Jacob, I do sometimes think twice before sharing things, which is really awful. And I think it speaks to just the online space, probably in general, because the whole point of being in these spaces is that the oversharing actually led to more connections, more learning, and more success for everyone. But the reality is that the way people will take and reframe someone else's work has sort of like changed the math, I think, for many of us. And I think a lot of people will lump this as like unethical behavior. And I get that. I think it's a really easy thing to say, like, oh, they shouldn't be copying somebody else's work or they're just jealous of you. These are things that you'll often hear people say if you kind of share these ideas out loud. And obviously, a big reason why this is happening is AI. All you have to do is take something from somebody, go put it into an AI tool, and be like, change this up a little bit and make it another acronym. And like I said, I think a lot of people think this is like unethical behavior, and I totally get it. But I actually think that there is a deeper human desire underneath. And I think that that is a desire to create, to build, to do meaningful work. And when people don't quite know how to get there on their own, they take a shortcut version of copying someone else's path. Doesn't make it right, but I think it's really worth understanding because this is one of the biggest opportunities we have to help more people cultivate their voice so they stop leaning on AI. I think about this a lot when I watch people building with Claude or Replit or Lovable right now. This is the energy where people are up until 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and it's not this unhealthy screen time copying type thing. It's creation energy. And what you realize is building and creating is so innately human. And the fact that we now have this power in our hands and can pretty much give it to anyone is so incredible that I think we have to lean into supporting people in the right way, especially our young people. I think we're going to see more isolation, more copying, and less of that genuine connection online that those made those early communities so powerful. Jacob talks about it. I've talked about it. Jacob didn't stop being generous. He didn't become secretive. He just got smarter about timing and where those learnings were going. He learned that there's a difference between sharing your work and sharing your strategy. Generosity should be our advantage, and it shouldn't be something that we're afraid to give. And so there's wisdom in knowing where that line is, and we'll be talking about that in our webinar. Because here's what I keep coming back to. When Anish Brahman talks about the climbing wall, he says the biggest jump isn't for people entering the workforce. It's for people who are already well up that ladder because they had to reach for something that doesn't have a clear path. Jacob did that, I did that, and we'll be sharing our stories with you so that you can do that too if it's something you want. 3 people he trusted said, "You're ready." And he let go of the ladder and he did the work. He figured out his math, relationships, and trust that opened district doors. He gave it a name that people laugh about, but then immediately understand what it is he does and what makes him special. And he built in public until he learned where the line was for him. And he kept showing up, one conversation at a time, in a world that's increasingly looking for shortcuts. Jacob reminds us the long game is the shortcut. I think the message of Open to Work and Jacob's story today land in the exact same place. Nobody will beat you at being you, but you have to do the work of figuring out what you actually means. Beyond your title, beyond your resume, you need to find that thread that runs through everything you've done. So here's what I'm going to leave you with. If you had to describe what you do, the actual capability you bring in one sentence, what would it be? And if you can't answer that yet, it's okay. We've got a webinar coming up. We're going to help you do exactly this, and we hope to see you all there. My name is Dr. Sabba Quidwai. Thank you so much for listening to Designing Schools.